he was asking me to do things that I believe were going to harm him, and we ended up splitting, going different ways, and it was amicable. But that was a case of somebody who is extremely intelligent, and probably more knowledgeable in some of these subjects than I am. But he lost track of what his goals were. And the point wasn't to try to make as much money as possible. The point was, what is the most prudent path to replace your income and give you a retirement income stream that you don't have to worry about outliving? That was the goal, not to outperform every other investment.
Right.
Welcome to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. I am your host, Chad Hufford, and this is the podcast where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the working world. Each week, we dive into the incredible stories of honest, hardworking folks who have found financial success through grit, determination, and good old-fashioned elbow grease. So if you're ready to be inspired and learn how to turn your hard work into your own success story, you're in the right place. This is the Blue Collar Millionaire Show.
Chad, I think as a general principle, the people that walk through these doors, whether that's literally or the people that, call us up, reach out to us online, pretty smart people that are pretty driven, folks they've done a lot of good things in life. And yet we see people make, I don't want to be mean, we see people make some choices that are just, they don't really jive with wisdom sometimes. And it's not because these people are not smart. I think it comes down to human behavior, and I raise my hand up with anyone. I mean, I've done that too. What are some of the dumbest, what are some of the worst choices you've seen smart people make when it comes to their finances?
Well, we touched on this in a recent episode, kind of this I will wait until, and perfectionism being a shroud for really procrastination. So I think that's one way that smart people can get themselves in trouble, is because they try to perfect something. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, talks about the importance of standardizing before we optimize, meaning we create the habit and we get consistent before we try to optimize the habit.
Right.
For somebody who's trying to read more, you're not picking up War and Peace and starting with that, or trying to translate French literature. Like, no, you might be reading some really basic, eye candy type reading that is, fantasy, whatever you want to read just to get started in reading. It's not going to be like super intense because you just want to start the habit. Right. If you're somebody who doesn't read, don't read really difficult things to begin the habit.
Yeah.
If you're somebody who is trying to invest more consistently, don't have a super complex strategy for investing. Make it simple. So I think that's one area, and I've mentioned this before, but I do think human beings, the tendency, especially when it's a new behavior, when there is uncertainty there, maybe even a little fear, or it's just going to be really hard. Something's going to be really hard, is we add complexity to the simple. Now, simple is not easy. Investing every single month in a diversified portfolio of companies across the globe is relatively simple, especially for our clients, because we do the more complex piece of actually creating the portfolio. They just have to invest every month. But they invest through the ups, the downs, the market storms, people yelling on TV that they should stop, bury their money in the backyard. But it's relatively simple to invest consistently, but it's really, really hard.
Right.
So I think the smarter somebody is, the easier it is to add complexity, to make something harder than it needs to be, and adding complexity to distance ourselves from the responsibility of acting.
Yeah, it's taking arithmetic and turning it into calculus kind of thing. Can you think of a story, whether it's with a client or somebody that maybe you know them outside of work, but just somebody that made a choice? Again, smart person, but they made a choice that you're kind of scratching your head. Maybe they're scratching their own head later on, looking back, going, "Why did I do that?"
Well, first of all, let me just preface. You might need to bring me back to this, look, but let me preface it by I do think the clients we work with, more than intelligent, they have extremely high character. And even for the ones that are probably above average intelligence, a lot of them don't have above average knowledge in investing, which my hope for people listening is that should be encouraging. You do not need to be an expert in investing to be an expert investor.
Right.
I was going to say that again. I don't know if I've ever said that in this podcast before, but you do not need to be an expert in investing to be an expert investor. It's more of a behavioral thing. It's really more of a character thing. The stick-to-itiveness, the persistence and the resiliency, the grit, the determination, the patience, like that doesn't take intelligence. Now, if you can marry intelligence to all those things, yes, it helps. But it doesn't matter how smart you are. If you don't have those things, it's going to be really hard for you to be a successful investor because emotions take over intelligence.
Right.
I mean, we all know very smart teenagers who make very bad decisions because of emotions. It's not an intellectual problem. It's an emotional issue. And yes, I just compared investors to teenagers because investments are volatile, just like teenagers. They're hot one moment, cold the next. You never know what they're going to do on any given day. So that can trigger a lot of those crazy emotions inside of us as investors too. So one particular example that sticks out, and I just again want to make this point because it's a behavioral thing. It's not an intellectual problem. We have computers that do a lot of the tough math stuff for us, but to behave right, it takes more of what's going on in here in your heart than what's going on up in here in your head. But I was working with somebody years ago, very, very intelligent, in fact, had a PhD in finance. And I think that got to him in the sense that he was trying to get too cute with some of his investments, overthinking things. And one of the things that makes diversification so difficult is when you own a wide variety of companies, there will always be something outperforming you.
Right.
If you own some large companies, some small companies, some growth companies, some value-based companies, some international companies, maybe some emerging market, and most of our clients have pieces of all that. Just by the simple math of it, one of those things is going to outperform the rest. So the tendency is to look at that and say, well, if XYZ fund is outperforming everything else in this portfolio, why don't I own more of that thing?
Right.
And oftentimes that's what's happening. I mean, sometimes everything is up together. Sometimes everything is down together. But oftentimes there is something in your portfolio that is bright and shining, sometimes even shooting the lights out. And usually there's something that's kind of bleeding quietly in the carpet. And you're just like, why do I even own that fund? It does nothing.
Right.
And that's what was happening with this individual. And he was looking at the metrics and looking at the fundamentals, all these different things. And he wanted to basically give up his diversification and consolidate around a couple of ideas because these ideas were making so much money. Like why diversify if this is a sure bet is what he was thinking. And I think Dad even ran into this back in the 90s. I mean, I remember him saying one time that was one of the hardest times for him to coach clients because tech was shooting the lights out, not completely different than what it's doing right now. And the fear then wasn't so much, is the market going to crash? The fear was, man, is everybody else getting richer faster than I am?
Right.
And why diversify if all you need to do is buy tech? Put .com at the end of your company name, and it just seemed like investors would flock to it. Right. Now, some of those companies like pets.com no longer exist today for good reasons. You can't just add .com to your business name and make money. You actually have to have a viable product and a business model. That's a conversation for another time. But that's what was happening to this individual. And again, he was extremely intelligent, pretty disciplined, but he got distracted by his own intelligence. He was trying to overthink the discipline of diversification. And the way it came down to it, he was asking me to do things that I believe was going to harm him. And we ended up splitting, going different ways, and it was amicable. But that was a case of somebody who is extremely intelligent and probably more knowledgeable in some of these subjects than I am. And probably, well, certainly was at the time. He had a PhD in this.
Yeah.
my degree's in biochemistry, but he lost track of what his goals were. And the point wasn't to try to make as much money as possible. The point was, what is the most prudent path to replace your income and give you a retirement income stream that you don't have to worry about outliving? That was the goal, not to outperform every other investment.
Right.
And to do that in the most prudent way. And sometimes very smart people take unnecessary risks. I think in his case, he was risking money he couldn't afford to lose to make a return that he didn't need.
Yeah. Having a lot of education in something can become a curse. I think sometimes one of the phrases you say often is what education without
without
is
execution
entertainment.
is entertainment. Yeah.
And it just, I think about, I remember talking with a buddy, this is many, many moons ago in a different life. And a bunch of guys at work, they would gamble on NFL games. And this young guy placed his first bet of his life, big Ravens fan, placed a bet, $50, and didn't cover. And he's all bummed out. And I was like, dude, that's the best thing that could happen to you. Because if you're a diehard football fan, you are the exact person that I know so much about this. I'll have the advantage. I'll be able to figure this out. Right. And how many doctors are, obese, right? Or horribly unhealthy. You could have a neuroscientist that's a drug addict, right? I mean, like, it's not about, because what you said earlier, you don't have to be an expert in investing to be
An expert investor.
right. And as you're saying it, I almost said, like, just right there, what does that even mean, being an expert in investing? Because I think there's probably two different schools of thought. There'd be the one that's like, well, an expert in investing is, I know all these different terms and all these different things, and I know all these different research papers. And I guess technically that would be an expert in investing. But I would say, really, if I was to define an expert in investing, just over my time here at Veritas and people I've gotten to know, it's somebody that maybe they don't know every single little, minute term, but they know real life what it is to be an investor. I mean, that's the exact kind of expert I would want to ride with, is the person that's been down the path.
And let me clarify a little bit. When I say expert investor, what I mean is results. They're getting expert. They are extremely successful, because that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
It isn't what you know; it's what you do, what you
Right.
accomplish. And I mean, you could be this amazing architect and have all this theory and knowledge, but you don't know actually how to execute that to actually build the house. You have a guy with a third grade education that just grew up building homes, and he's the one that actually produces the house. Which one's the expert? I mean, you could argue,
Right.
and maybe it's semantics,
Right.
but what I mean by that is to be an expert in results, because people focus too much on investing performance, and what they miss is investor performance. And those are two very different things. So one is about, I think, the tools and tactics. The other is about the education. You can have the best tools available to you, and as a mechanic, let's say, and you've got all this fancy software, can read the chips and all these diagnostic routines. You could give me all that stuff. You do not want me fixing your car. Doesn't matter what the tools are. And I wouldn't have that expert knowledge anyway, so it might break down a little bit, but I have expert mechanical performance at my fingertips, but you're not going to get expert mechanical results because the breakdown is me. Now, in that case, you do need to be somewhat of an expert in that thing. So again, not a perfect metaphor, but the tools you have are only as good as how you operate them. But in the context of finances, we have experts who actually put the portfolios together. And that's part of our job at Veritas is getting a marriage between what the experts are doing in the investments and the needs of the client, getting a fit between the two of those. So it takes that need for expert. We outsource it.
Yeah.
We outsource to I believe, some of the best in the world at that. But our job is connecting that. Okay, what are the expert tools and tactics for this family, for their needs? But then the family, they just have to execute every month.
Yeah.
They don't need to decide where it goes, but they do need to put in the work. Just like somebody who goes to the gym, they don't need to be able to describe the Krebs cycle or the electron transport chain or understand how creatine helps with ADP turnover back into ATP to produce anaerobic. They don't even know any of that. They don't even know what those terms mean.
I didn't even know if you're speaking English or you're making words up, but I'm tracking.
But they go in there and they do the exercises they're supposed to do, and they eat what they're supposed to eat.
Right.
Now, if they know why, can that help? Absolutely. But to get expert results, they have to have expertise around them,
Right.
and they just have to execute. And I think with a lot of our clients, they are just very high character individuals, and some of them do have expertise in other areas for sure.
Right.
But that there are, and we have some that do have extreme intelligence. But that isn't what makes them great investors. What makes them great investors is they have very high character.
We've talked about this on multiple episodes over the last couple of years, but I think one of the hardest things for a human to do, especially somebody that is a high performer, somebody that is really, because when I think about our average client, they are exceptional at multiple areas of life. That might be a financial aspect, it might not be, but they're really, really exceptional at multiple aspects. And yet they're willing to not be totally hands off, but they're willing to trust and basically submit themselves to guidance and advice of a different expert. And I think that's one of the hardest things for a human to do, again, especially a high performer. And the image that's in my brain, I just went through The Last Dance again. Like, I don't think for a second,
Just the Netflix, the Chicago
about Michael
Bulls,
Jordan
yes.
and the final championship, and I don't think for a second Michael Jordan thought that Phil Jackson would go out there and dominate him on the court, but he submitted.
Yeah,
I mean, and obviously Michael Jordan himself is regardless of his feats on the court, one of the great basketball minds as well.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he was willing to submit to, Phil Jackson's leadership and coaching. And even within the players, seeing the way that, Steve Kerr fit into that, the way that different guys fit into that, the way that, Rodman, the whole thing. And yes, like we can always talk about sports because we love sports, but I mean, there is something there. There's a reason why teams like that only come around. So part of that's because of MJ, part of that's because of the cohesiveness and Phil Jackson too. And just, we get to see that literally every day here, where we have exceptional people that are book smart, but more importantly, exceptional in different areas of life. But that common denominator, if they're willing to sit down, receive feedback and coaching from someone else. And as you've said, there are certain folks that as a general tendency, can't really seem to do that because they might be a little bit too smart for their own good sometimes. And I think of the phrase that I hear all the time, you hear all the time, somebody will, whether they're calling up or it's just somebody you're talking to at church or the barbecue or whatever, and they're like, I know enough about investing to get myself into trouble. And they kind of say it with a chuckle, but it's true, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I think that's a good point to make too, because we always talk about finance as a team sport, and we have our own experts that we lean on, and this isn't like the ideas only come from this room,
right?
I mean, I emailed Nick Murray earlier today, thanking him for something that he had sent out recently, and I mean that's somebody I lean. He is the guy has so much knowledge on investing, but even more importantly in human psychology. And again, getting behavior. So that's what you talked about, is someone like Michael Jordan, as good as he was, Phil Jackson was able to make him better. He was able to get something out of Michael that Michael couldn't get out of himself. And Nick Murray is one of the financial minds that does that for us. We lean on him. I mean, Dave Ramsey's organization would be another. Some of the folks at Dimensional Funds. Like we are not the end all be all of financial management.
You're not a lone wolf out here trying to coach.
We have so many people that depend on our guidance and insight for their financial future. We can't have just a bunch of inbred ideas that start and stop inside of Veritas. Yeah. So we are getting our own coaching because we don't pretend we have all the best ideas, and we're always looking to implement those things. This is one of the things I love about this is even as I get older and my body complains more and I slow down in other areas, there's no reason why I can't be significantly better 10 years from now at this than I am today. And to be able to better coach clients, be able to better plan. And again, finance is a team sport, and I love that about this. And on the flip side, just kind of examples using a different metaphor, we had a pilot come to us about 5 years ago, and super nice guy, and very, very intelligent. But what it came down to is exactly what you said. Can you submit yourself to the plan? I told him, I said, you've been literally and figuratively flying the plane your entire career. Are you going to be able to sit back there in first class, relax and enjoy the flight, especially when we hit turbulence, without coming into the cockpit and trying to take over the controls? And ultimately, that's where we had to part ways, is he was not willing to relinquish that. He liked the ideas. He actually even liked the idea of being able to not worry about it.
Yeah.
But we both kind of decided that when push came to shove, his intelligence, and some of it might be a need for control because he'd been in that position.
Yeah.
But his intelligence is going to override his ability to just trust the process. And I mean, I just was able to frame it in exactly those words. And
Right.
he said, no, that's going to be really hard for me. Because when things seem to be going wrong in the flight, I probably will be in the cockpit.
Yeah. If you have another example, I want to be able to get to it, but I want to just ask a quick question, just following up on the pilot example. So was he pretty darn self-aware the whole time, and it was a relatively quick process of him realizing like, yeah, this is not gonna be a good marriage? Or did you guys try to work together for a bit and then it just kind of, you realized that it was not gonna be a good fit?
It was a longer process.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of towards the end of it.
Okay.
And I don't think he had ever thought that through. It was something I was mindful of to begin with, because, you know, as one of our clients would say, you don't try to guide the guide, and he's a professional hunting guide. And, you know, he'll butt heads with clients when they're trying to, you know, they're up here from Missouri, and they're like, well, you know, man, I think, you know, this looks like a good spot for bear. Like, okay, well, Lance basically lives there.
Right.
Like, he knows that individual bear's behavior. He probably has a name for it anyway. But you don't guide the guide. Like, that's disruptive. Now, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It's just you have to be able to trust the process. And if your guide and the hunter are literally going in different directions, it's not going to be a successful hunt. Even if your idea was good or better than the guide's. There might be a bigger bear that direction, but if your team all splits up, it's not going to work. Same thing happens here. And that was a concern for me, is will this guy be able to hand over the controls? And again, we'd worked through a lot of different things, came up with some good ideas. And that was kind of like that come to Jesus moment, where I just point blank asked him. And I don't think he'd ever thought about that before. And this isn't to say that, you know, the folks that are working with, they have no input. Like that's a big thing what we talk about during our plan reviews is, hey, you know, here's your goals. Have they changed? Let's make sure that what you're doing is still in line with those goals. Here's some suggestions. What do you think? We can't force anybody to do anything with their money. It has to be a team approach. But we try to get ahead of that and just see how coachable are people. Are they willing to be guided? Are they willing to hand over the reins, so to speak, or the controls? And with this individual, it was something that I was concerned about, but before we actually made it official and moved to council, that was kind of the fleece that I was laying out there. And ultimately, that's where it broke down.
What's one more example you think of? And again, even if it's somebody that maybe you didn't work with at Veritas, just somebody you know of, but somebody who, smart person, probably excellent in certain aspects of their life, made a really poor financial choice.
I think, so I'm going to generalize a little bit, but it's coming out of a specific example. I think that people, again, who are more educated, maybe more intelligent, they consume too much data.
Okay.
And not all data is knowledge. Or I should say, not all data is even information. Some is just data. It's just random statistics and things like that. So not all data is information, and not all information is knowledge, but there's even bigger gap between knowledge and discernment. And flooding yourself with too much data information can actually pull people off course. And I just know one particular individual who's he's an engineer, very, very intelligent, and has made countless financial mistakes, pulling out of markets, trying to time markets, giving up his diversification, putting too much money in one particular area, trying to make a killing, and inevitably got killed by it.
Yeah.
But his investment decisions are being driven by the news and the data that he collects, not his own financial goals. And that would be akin to somebody building a house based off of the weather report and speculation around what the storms coming in and things like that, rather than what his own needs were for that structure. And short term, does the weather matter? Yeah, absolutely. But you build your house for the climate, not for the weather report. And this individual, I think, had very little thought process around what is the goal and purpose of this money, because his investing, his financial plan was really being driven by external factors, not internal factors. And we always say there's no portfolio without a plan. I mean, that your portfolio is not designed to outperform an index or to outperform your neighbor. And going back to what we said earlier, investor performance. Most of our clients have outperformed by a significant margin the average people around them, the average investor. Probably not even that close. But it doesn't mean their investments were better.
Right.
Their behavior was better. They utilized, I mean, some of our clients, they're tied to the investments that their employer provides. They don't have a choice to get better investments.
Yeah.
We just use what's there. But can we use that more effectively by creating a strategy to marry those investments, those tools and tactics with their own long-term needs? And that's where success comes. That's what we're managing for, is what are your needs? What are your goals? How do we make these tools bring that to fruition? Not how do we get these tools to outperform somebody else's tools? And with this individual, I don't think that connection was ever made. It was not about what am I trying to build long-term. It was how can I maximize performance in the moment? And ultimately, it cost him a lot of those long-term goals because he was measuring the wrong variables. And when you're focused on the short term, it's really hard to make long-term decisions.
And if he listens to the podcast, it's okay. It's somebody else we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not you. It's not you.
Chad, I appreciate you diving into these, and I look forward to hearing a few more client stories as we go forward.
Absolutely. Thanks, Logan.
Thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. We hope this episode has been inspiring and beneficial to you. If you want help on your journey to financial freedom, reach out to us at veritasalaska.com. We'd love to sit down over a cup of coffee with you, either here in our office or virtually, and get to know you and your needs. And though this podcast is free of charge, we do ask that you please do us two quick favors. If you enjoyed the episode, give our pod a great rating on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use, and also give us a follow on Instagram. We hope you have a wonderful day filled with gratitude and intentionality. God bless.